Before the sun even crests the horizon, 12-year-old Micah Brooks is already on the move, his small frame trudging along a lonely, dust-choked road that winds through the edge of a forgotten town. He's wearing a school uniform 2 sizes too small. The cuffs don't reach his wrists, the pants are frayed at the knees, and his backpack sags from one broken strap. The soles of his shoes flap slightly with each step, barely clinging together. But Micah walks with purpose. He glances at the worn-out watch on his wrist. Exactly 2 hours until school starts. Just enough time if he doesn't slow down. The world around him is still half asleep. Shuttered gas stations, cracked sidewalks, buildings hollowed out and overtaken by weeds. As he rounds a bend near a thick line of overgrown bushes, a low hum creeps into the air behind him. A sleek black SUV has pulled onto the road, moving slowly to slowly. It doesn't honk, doesn't flash its lights. It just trails him, the purr of its engine, the only sign it's there. Micah's shoulders stiffen, his breath catches. He doesn't look back, but his pace quickens, the rhythm of his footsteps changing as fear curls at the edge of his spine. He's walked this road every day for 3 years, but today something's different. Something's wrong. Cut to the calm, measured voice of Mr. Dalton, Brentview Prep's vice principal. Micah walks 10 miles a day. Rain, sun, doesn't matter. He's never late. He's never angry, and he tops every subject, even math. But this morning felt off. The camera returns to Micah, now moving faster, eyes scanning the brush and road ahead, as if measuring the distance between where he is and where he might be safe. The SUV continues to follow, keeping just enough distance to feel like a question rather than a threat. But Micah knows better. He clutches the strap of his bag tighter, sweat beads at his temple despite the cool morning air. This isn't just another walk to school. Today, someone is watching him, and Micah can feel it in his bones. As he disappears into the rising haze of dawn, the camera lingers on his face dents, wary, unblinking. Then the mist swallows him whole. Micah Brooks wakes up every morning in a one-room shack that barely keeps out the wind, its walls patched with plastic sheets and duct tape. The roof leaks when it rains, and the electricity flickers more often than not. He shares the narrow cot with his mother, Lydia, a woman who once commanded operating rooms as a brilliant trauma nurse, but now scrubs hospital floors through the night. Her name still stained by a false accusation that cost her everything. Years ago, a patient died under another doctor's negligence, but the blame conveniently fell on Lydia. Too quiet, too black, too expendable. She didn't fight back. She just folded inward, lost her license, her confidence, and eventually, most of her joy. When Micah was 6, his father walked out after being arrested for embezzlement and fraud, leaving behind only silence and shame. Lydia never spoke of him again, and Micah learned early to stop asking. What remained was the two of them surviving, side by side, on the edge of a town that seemed to forget they existed. Despite the long nights and her unraveling spirit, Lydia never let go of one thing: Micah's education. They can't take your mind, she would whisper on the mornings when she came home just as he was leaving. So, protect it. Build something with it. And so, each day, Micah pulled on his uniform patched, faded, 2 sizes too small and walked 5 miles to Brentview Prep. He didn't beg for rides. He didn't make excuses. He just walked, head down, eyes scanning everything. At school, he was the kind of student teachers loved on paper. Straight A's, perfect attendance, quiet in class, but no one looked deeper. Most didn't know his story, and few cared to ask. Some students mocked the holes in his shoes, the smell of bleach that clung faintly to his clothes, or the fact that he never stayed after school for clubs or games. But Micah never complained. He took notes. He kept his head low, and he waited. Principal Owens, a well-dressed man more concerned with test scores and donor meetings than student welfare, had repeatedly tried to push for Micah's transfer to a lower-funded school closer to his address. "He doesn't fit our demographic," Owens once said during a staff meeting, but Lydia refused to sign the paperwork. "This school is all he's got," she told the front office assistant flatly, arms crossed, jaw clenched with quiet fire. And so Micah remained, a ghost in the halls of privilege present, but barely acknowledged. The only person who seemed to truly see him was Ms. Jenna Wallace, a first-year English teacher whose lesson plans were still handwritten and idealistic. Fresh out of college and full of cautious energy, she began to notice how Micah never raised his hand, even when he clearly knew the answer. How he flinched slightly when someone raised their voice. How he was always the first to finish his work, and the last to speak unless spoken to. There was something haunted in his silence, not just introversion, but a kind of vigilance, as if he were always waiting for something or someone. Ms. Wallace started staying after class to ask how he was doing, offering snacks she pretended were extras from the teacher's lounge. Micah responded politely, but never lingered. Still, something in his eyes told her he wasn't just shy, he was surviving. At home, Micah rarely saw his mother awake. Their schedules passed each other like ghosts in a hallway. She left a thermos of tea on the nightstand for him every morning, and he left the dishes washed before she came home. They loved each other in silence. But beneath Lydia's heavy eyes and stiff movements was a woman losing the war with herself, carrying guilt not hers, sadness she couldn't name, and a son she worried she was failing. And Micah, observant and too mature for his years, felt it all. He wore the weight of her pain like a second skin. Though he had no time for games or friendships, he read constantly history, science, poetry, anything to stretch his mind beyond the boundaries of their broken lives. Each day he walked 10 miles. Each day he sat alone at lunch. And each day he waited for something to shift. But lately the world had started to feel different, heavier, like a storm was coming. And deep inside, Micah had the unsettling sense that someone had begun to notice him, not kindly, not casually, but deliberately. One grey Monday morning, Micah arrives at Brentview Prep, later than usual, sweat clinging to his brow despite the cool air. His uniform is dustier than normal, his backpack clutched tighter, and when he slips into his seat at the back of Ms. Wallace's classroom, his hands tremble just slightly. He doesn't say a word, just places his perfectly completed homework on her desk and sinks into his chair like he's trying to disappear. Ms. Wallace notices instantly. His usually guarded eyes are now wide, shadowed with something deeper than exhausting fear. During break, she gently approaches him, crouching beside his desk. "Micah, are you okay?" He hesitates, then mutters under his breath, barely audible, "A car followed me again." The words hang there, cold and heavy. Ms. Wallace feels her stomach tighten. Later, she brings it up with Principal Owens in the front office, her voice low but urgent. "He said a car followed him. He's scared. Someone needs to look into this." Owens, sitting behind his desk in his tailored suit and matching indifference, barely looks up from his laptop. "This is a rough neighborhood, Jenna. People drive slow, kids spook easy," he says dismissively, his tone curt. "Don't get dramatic." But Ms. Wallace can't shake the look in Micah's eyes. That night, after grading papers and double-checking tomorrow's lesson plan, she does something impulsive. She drives the same route Micah takes to school. The road is darker than she imagined. Long stretches of silence broken only by the wind pushing through broken fences and rustling leaves. Then, near a cluster of overgrown bushes, she sees it. A black SUV, engine silent, headlights off, parked, waiting. She slows as she passes, heart hammering, and steals a glance-tinted windows. No movement. The car doesn't follow her, but it doesn't need to. The message is clear. Someone is watching. The next morning, the SUV is gone. But Miss Wallace returns again that night and the next. Some days it's there, other days not. She starts documenting everything: license plate numbers, exact times, street corners. Her instincts scream this isn't random. When she can't keep it to herself any longer, she finds Lydia Brooks outside the school one afternoon and gently asks if they can talk. At first, Lydia is wary, her eyes tired and defensive. But when Ms. Wallace mentions the SUV, Lydia's composure shatters. Her hands tremble. She sinks onto the school's stone steps and begins to cry quietly into her palms. "This is why I didn't want him walking alone," she whispers. "But we have no choice. I leave before he wakes up. There's no one else." After a long pause, Lydia finally admits what she's feared for years. "I think it's his father's people. They used to send letters after the trial. Threats, demands. I thought it stopped." Her voice shakes as she continues. "He got out of prison a year ago. I didn't tell Micah. I didn't want to scare him. But if they found us, if they're watching him now, it means they want something." Miss Wallace sits beside her in silence, stunned. The pieces of Micah's silence, his fear, his long walk through danger every day, all starting to fall into place. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a troubled student and a rough neighborhood. Something darker was circling, something that had waited in the shadows and now had begun to move. The black SUV became a ghost in Micah's daily life, never predictable, never gone for long. Some days it sat parked beneath the same crooked tree off the old service road. Other times it appeared farther down the route, engine purring softly, windows opaque. The driver never stepped out, never called out, never made a move. But the presence loomed large in Micah's mind, a shadow stitched into every step he took. He started flinching at car engines, checking over his shoulder every few minutes, walking faster, breathing harder. The quiet survival he once managed had now cracked wide open into constant dread. Then one morning, the pattern broke. The SUV was already parked when Micah rounded the bend. But this time the door opened, and a man in a brown coat stepped out slowly, deliberately. He didn't speak, just knelt beside the roadside and placed a white envelope into the grass. Then returned to the vehicle and drove off. Micah hesitated, heart hammering, then approached the envelope. Inside, 10 crisp $100 bills and a folded note that read, "Tell your mother to call me. I'm not the enemy." See, that night when Lydia came home, exhausted and soaked from a downpour, Micah handed her the note in silence. She stared at it for a long time, unmoving. When she finally opened it and saw the signature, her face twisted in disbelief and fury. Without a word, she crumpled the letter and shoved it into the tiny fireplace in the corner. "He left us," she shouted, her voice ragged with years of repressed rage. "He stood on that witness stand and lied, said it was me, said I made the mistake, and they believed him. They let him walk clean while I was fired, blacklisted, humiliated." Her hands trembled violently, not from fear but from memory. "We lost everything, Micah, because of him." Through Lydia's bitter confession, the truth unfolded like a wound. Calvin Brooks, once a respected physician and Micah's father, had been the one responsible for the fatal medical error at the hospital. But in a backdoor deal with the administration, he pinned it on Lydia to protect his license and reputation. The hospital got their scapegoat, and Calvin relocated to another state with a clean record. He never returned, never sent a dime, never asked about Micah, until now, while Lydia tried to keep her rage from boiling over. Micah sat quietly in the corner, absorbing the weight of this revelation. His father wasn't just absent, he was the architect of their collapse. And now, after years of silence, he was back, leaving money on the side of the road like an apology could be bought in bills. But the SUV wasn't the only storm closing in. A week later, a social worker knocked on their door. Her voice was calm but firm. "There's been a report," she said, looking around the cramped one-room space. Concerns about Micah walking 10 miles unsupervised, about unstable housing. The school flagged it. Lydia's face went pale. Micah stood frozen. The report hadn't come from Consonant, was retaliation. Likely Principal Owens, trying to force the boy out of Brentview Prep once and for all. The social worker made notes, took photos of the shack, asked questions about income and supervision. When she left, she said, "We'll be in touch. There may need to be a temporary placement for Micah's safety." Lydia waited until she was gone to collapse into a chair, her hands gripping her scalp. "They're trying to take you," she whispered. "They're trying to take you from me." At school, the tension spread like smoke. Micah noticed how certain teachers began looking at him differently, curious, cautious, some even cold. He heard whispers about the boy with the report. Kids avoided him more than usual. Then Miss Wallace pulled him aside one afternoon, her face taut with concern. "Micah, I'm being warned to stop asking questions. To let this go." She lowered her voice. "The board says I'm overstepping. If I don't back off, they'll find a reason to let me go." Mika's chest tightened. The one adult who had actually tried to protect him was being silenced. Even she was under siege. Everywhere he turned, the world that once ignored him now seemed to close in, weaponized. A father lurking in shadows, threatening to rewrite the past. A school trying to erase his future. A system ready to fracture his only family. Micah, once so good at making himself invisible, could no longer hide. The survival he once managed, with quiet resilience, had become a war zone, and he stood at the center, silent, scared, but burning with something else beneath the fear, anger, a need for truth, and a question no one seemed willing to answer. Why now? Why was Calvin Brooks coming back? And what did he really want? On a grey Wednesday morning, the school bell rang, but Micah didn't walk through the gates. Ms. Wallace waited, watching the door longer than she should have. By mid-morning, worry had bloomed into panic. He was never late, never absent, not without a call or a note. She abandoned her classroom during lunch and drove straight to the outskirts of town, heart racing as she approached the little shack. Micah called home. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was thick with silence, and something more troubling. Lydia lay on the floor, conscious but dazed, her speech slurred and her limbs slow, as though sedated. Ms. Wallace knelt beside her, trying to keep calm. "Lydia, where's Micah? What happened?" On the kitchen table lay a single folded note. The handwriting was clean, sharp. "He's with me, for now. C. Ms." Wallace grabbed her phone to call the police, but Lydia clutched her wrist, eyes wide with desperation. "No cops," she whispered hoarsely. "They won't help. He's rich. He has connections. You don't understand. He'll spin it. He always spins it." Her voice broke as she tried to sit up. "They'll believe him over me again." As the chaos settled into dread, the truth came tumbling out. Calvin Brooks wasn't just back. He had launched a full-scale legal attack. His lawyers had already filed in family court, demanding full custody of Micah. Their argument: Lydia's poverty, her living conditions, her history of alleged negligence, and most damning of all, Micah's 10-mile daily walk to school, all painted her as an unfit parent. Calvin claimed he had the means, the stability, and the concern a father should have. Now, he had taken Micah without warning and retreated to a luxury home in another county, not quite hidden, but just out of reach. The house was everything. Micah had never had a room of his own, overflowing with brand new toys, clothes, a personal tutor, a pantry stocked with anything he could want. But it didn't feel like home. Cameras watched his every move. The house was quiet in a way that felt artificial, suffocating. Calvin was strangely charming in public, but cold in private, distant, rehearsed. He didn't ask Micah what he wanted. He told him how lucky he was. Micah felt trapped in velvet walls. But Micah was no longer the quiet, passive boy Calvin remembered. Something had changed in him. Each time Calvin took a call behind closed doors, each time he muttered to one of his lawyers, each time he cursed. Lydia's name, Micah, listened, and when he found an old phone tucked in a drawer, he quietly connected it to Wi-Fi and began recording everything he could. Conversations about bribing hospital executives, notes about paying off a judge, a call where Calvin admitted, "I had to take her down. She would have buried me if I hadn't moved first." Late at night, under his blanket, Micah transferred the files to a hidden cloud account and reached out to the only adult he trusted, Ms. Wallace. He created a private chat, disguised as a game app, and typed just one message: "I have proof. I'm okay. Please help us." Ms. Wallace barely slept. That night, by morning, she had driven straight to a legal aid office that specialized in family defense cases. Armed with Micah's recordings and a long list of injustices Lydia had suffered, she pleaded for help. The team listened and agreed. What had once looked like a messy custody case was actually the cover for a years-old injustice, manipulation, and abuse of power. They began preparing a full counter case, one that would reveal not just who Calvin Brooks was, but what he had done to Lydia, to the court, and now to Micah. The war for Micah's future was no longer fought in whispers and shadows. It had become a legal firestorm, one with real stakes and real consequences. And for the first time, Micah wasn't just a boy being watched. He was the one watching back. The courtroom was modest, tucked away in a quiet wing of the county courthouse. But inside it pulsed with quiet intensity. Calvin Brooks sat confidently at the polished table, flanked by lawyers in tailored suits who spoke with cold precision and carried binders full of arguments. Across from him, Lydia Brooks sat alone in a worn navy blazer that didn't quite fit, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her attorney, from the pro bono legal aid team, was calm but clearly outmatched in firepower. Yet Lydia had something far more powerful, her son and the truth. When it was time for Micah to testify, the courtroom hushed. He stepped forward, in his too small school uniform, the same one he had worn the day Calvin took him, and climbed into the witness chair. His voice was small at first, tremulous, but steady. "I used to walk 5 miles to school every day," he began. "And every morning, my mum would be there. Even if she hadn't slept, even if she had nothing to give, she made me believe I could be something." Then, with hands slightly shaking, he pulled out the old phone. "I recorded something," he said. The judge allowed it. A clerk connected the audio to the speakers. Calvin's voice filled the room, cold, calculated, unapologetic. "I had to take her down. She would have buried me if I hadn't moved first." Gasps echoed quietly as the tape played on, conversations about bribes, lies, manipulation. And then Micah spoke again. "My dad doesn't want me. He wants control. My mum never stopped loving me, even when we had nothing. He had everything, but he never showed up, not once." The silence that followed felt heavier than any gavel. The judge leaned forward, eyes thoughtful, lips pressed into a tight line. "In light of the evidence and the minor's testimony," she said, "this court rules in favor of Ms. Lydia Brooks. Full custody is reinstated. Mr. Calvin Brooks' parental rights are hereby suspended, pending further investigation." Calvin said nothing. His lawyers packed up silently. But outside, as the courthouse doors opened, reporters were waiting. Questions flew, cameras flashed, but the only thing that mattered in that moment was the way Lydia wrapped her arms around her. So Ms. Wallace, tears in her eyes, joined them and pulled Micah into a fierce hug. Later that week, something unexpected happened. A story about Micah's courage aired on local news, and a retired teacher turned philanthropist saw it. Touched by Micah's resilience and Lydia's devotion, he reached out quietly to Ms. Wallace. Within days, Micah was offered a full academic scholarship to a private middle school nearby, with transportation included. And waiting in front of his home that Saturday morning was something Micah never dreamed of having: a brand new mountain bike, dark blue, with his name engraved on the frame. Micah didn't say much as he ran his fingers over the handlebars, eyes wide with disbelief. But when he looked up at Lydia and Ms. Wallace, he smiled wide and unguarded and said the words that had once felt impossible: "I think we're gonna be okay." Months had passed, but the mornings still began early. Only now, Micah no longer trudged 5 miles down the dusty roadside with blistered feet and a torn backpack. He rode his bike proudly, its wheels humming against the pavement, sunlight flashing off the engraved nameplate. Lydia walked beside him for the first few blocks, her steps slower but steadier than they'd been in years. She still worked long shifts, still bore the quiet weight of everything they'd survived. But something in her had softened the tightness in her shoulders, the worry in her eyes, all eased just a little by hope. Micah still topped his class, still studied late, but now he smiled more in hallways, at lunch, even during group work. He wasn't just the quiet boy in the back anymore. He had become something else, a symbol of quiet strength, a story whispered among students who had once overlooked him. His new teachers praised his work ethic. Some of the younger kids even looked up to him. On his route to school, at the very bend in the road where the black SUV had once stalked him, there stood a mural, a gift from the community. It stretched across a crumbling brick wall, vibrant and full of motion. It showed a boy in a too small uniform walking alone down a long road. Behind him loomed the shadow of fear, dark, towering. But ahead, that same boy walked forward again, this time with wings unfurling from his shoulders, radiant and free. Micah slowed his bike as he passed it. He reached out, let his fingers brush the paint. The wall was warm in the morning light, the colors alive with memory. He stood there a moment, quiet and still. Then he leaned in and whispered, "This time, no one's watching, I'm leading." And with that, he rode on into a new day, into a future he'd claimed for himself. Asterisk, fade, out, asterisk.